Hello, my name is Garrett Dawe, and I'm the engineer of traffic and safety for the Michigan Department of Transportation. I've only been in this role about 7 months or so, but I've been with the department for just over 20 years, and much of that time has been spent in the traffic and safety area. So I'm certainly familiar with the concepts and themes of traffic and safety from the engineer's perspective, but just new to my role in the statewide role here. Previously, I was in more of a regional position, and in that position, in the last few years, started to hear quite a bit about the safe system approach, and seen a lot of promotional type information on it, hearing quite a bit about it from our central office, even seeing that had been incorporated into our state's strategic highway safety plan. And then once I got into my new role here, it started to get a lot of questions from the public, from other entities, even from within our organization on how is MDOT going to implement the safe system approach? What are we doing differently to implement it? And quite frankly, didn't have a great answer for that. So what I want to share with you today is not necessarily current practice in Michigan or a policy or anything of that nature, but it's rather a vision or maybe a plan for how we can get more specific with it as to addressing Michigan's traffic and safety issues, and making the safe system approach a bit more tangible rather than a philosophy, a little bit more actionable. So those are the elements I want to cover here in the next 5 to 10 minutes. So I think anytime you're talking about safety, you kind of have to start with the big picture, right? And this is a chart that shows the number of fatalities, the number of serious injuries that have occurred on Michigan's roadways in the last 10 years. And when I look at this chart, what I see is data that's a bit stagnant. Yes, there's some ups, there's some downs. I think if you put a trend line on both values, it would slightly trend upwards, right? But in the grand scheme of things, it almost looks like a bit of a plateau. Like we've achieved quite a bit, but we've hit a limit as to how much we've been achieving recently. So I think maybe this would indicate or point to the fact that we do need a fresh approach. We need some fresh ideas in order to get these numbers moving in the correct direction, which is down rather than just across the screen in a straight line. So I think that's the big picture element, right? And like most states, Michigan has a strategic highway safety plan. Our current plan runs through it was finalized in 2023 and runs us through 2026. And like I mentioned earlier, what was new with our plan this time around was incorporation of the safe system approach, and the language that's within that, and as well as specific goals tied to achieving zero fatalities and zero serious injuries by the year 2050. So those are important. Those are very ambitious things, but they're also words on paper. And I think we need to make sure that we're taking those words seriously and implementing strategies and approaches that are likely to actually get us there or improve the chances of us achieving these very robust goals. Most likely the folks listening to this are very familiar with the safe system approach and have seen this graphic quite a bit. I'll be honest, when I first saw it, it seemed a little bit overwhelming. You have the 5 elements, understanding the concept, certainly that redundancy is critical, right? That the responsibility is shared. It's not just one entity or one group that's going to achieve zero deaths and serious injuries on our roadways. It's everyone working together. That all makes sense. But when you look at it from a perspective of an engineer at a Department of Transportation and you say implement this, it can feel overwhelming and you're not really sure where to start. So what I'm proposing, or what I think makes the most sense, is to say, well, what element do we have the most control over? Which one do we influence the most? And I think that's pretty obvious that safe roads would be that element. Now, is it linked to other elements such as safe speeds and safe road users? Yeah, of course it is. But I think when you just start and say, well, this will be the element that we focus the most on at the DOT, and that it's safe roads, I think that automatically just starts to simplify it a little bit, and then you can continue going further into the weeds to simplify it even more and come up with actual tangible strategies. But it starts with this. Um, like most states, or perhaps all states, MDOT has a lot of initiatives intended to increase awareness of the issues that we have on our roads with fatalities and serious injuries. And we have postcards, we have, changing culture starts with you, bumper stickers, we have pamphlets, we have graphics that show the number of lives lost in the last 10 years and relate that to a town in Michigan. That can really drive the message home, right? All sorts of graphics and promotional materials. And I think they're very effective at raising awareness of the issue. But I would ask, do these strategies actually reduce fatalities and serious injuries? And if I went back to my first slide and showed that stagnant performance, I think the answer to that is no. So does it mean that we stop doing promotions? No, I don't think we do. But I think we cannot rely on them to actually change our numbers. We have to do real things, right? So that's where I come up with an enhanced safe system approach for Michigan. And perhaps enhanced is the wrong word, but I think it's starting to drive home some more specific themes that maybe we can implement as a Department of Transportation. So I think we've probably all heard that through the safe system approach, you should accommodate human mistakes. I'd like to enhance that a bit, because when I hear accommodate, and I think when others hear accommodate, the first thing that comes to mind is go ahead and drive drunk. We will accommodate you. And I don't think that is the intent of this, right? I think it's more, well, let's predict the more obvious and redundant human mistakes that are being made, and let's compensate for those. And let's do so at an extent that is reasonable. I think it's okay to acknowledge that occasionally crashes occur that are outside of our ability to influence or control. Just extreme situations, right? And I think setting those aside and not including them as part of your data set probably makes sense, at least initially, to help you gain focus and develop strategies that make sense. So predicting and compensating for human mistakes to an extent that is reasonable is a theme. Providing room for error, right? I think we've all heard this, and simplifying decision-making for drivers, for vulnerable road users, et cetera. But I think those things are important, but I think it's also important to not do so to an extent that promotes extreme comfort on our roadways and complacency amongst road users. We often complain about the levels of distraction on our roadways, right? But I think we also need to ask, well, why? Why are people so comfortable looking at their phones or engaging in some other sort of distraction while they're traveling 70 miles per hour down a roadway? It's because it feels relatively comfortable. And I think then we need to ask the question, should it? I think we also need to be courageous and acknowledge that many of our safety treatments, whether they're in the past or they're in the future, may generate some complaints, may not be popular, at least initially. But if we know it's the right thing to do, if we know it'll move the numbers in the right direction, we need to show courage and implement them in the face of scrutiny at times. A little bit of stoicism as well. I think we need to focus on things that we can control, things that we can influence, and most importantly, things that we can measure. If we're implementing a strategy that we're unable to measure whether or not it's successful, perhaps we should revisit whether or not that strategy makes sense. I think by focusing on these things, the things that we can influence, we're more likely to see better results and gain a little bit of steam and momentum towards achieving our goals. The proactive side of things, I think, and many states are already moving this direction, including Michigan. But I think we need to start focusing more on the roadway characteristics that are most susceptible to fatal and serious injury crashes, and focus our efforts on those characteristics in a proactive manner. This would be a shift from focusing on the exact locations where fatal and serious injury crashes have occurred, say in the last 5 years. That can be somewhat random, but when you start looking at the roadway characteristics that are present, the randomness starts to go away and trends really start to be revealed. And then also, let's ask why, right? The more you ask why, the more you can get into finding solutions to some problems. And overall, I'd like to start implementing this theme within the department of we, as in practitioners at MDOT staff, we need to get more comfortable with making drivers uncomfortable. And that doesn't mean that it has to feel dangerous to drive on our roads. That's not what I mean. And I think there are scales of this, but I think it's very relatable when you talk about work zones, when you talk about urban cores with heavy vulnerable road user activity. It's okay to make a driver feel as though they should slow down, put both hands on the wheel, and keep their eyes on the road. That's what I mean by uncomfortable. Just a couple examples before I close on how some of this has been implemented in Michigan, and how it can continue to be implemented. But starting to looking at the data, again, like I said, roadway characteristics. So if we look at lane departure crashes, only those that resulted in a fatality and serious injury in the last 5 years on state highways, we see that over half are occurring on non-freeways. We see that of those occurring on non-freeways, nearly 90% are where the speed limit is higher. Why? I think we understand why. The higher the speed, the higher the kinetic energy, the higher the severity, right? And then we also see that over 90% of these non-freeway crashes occur on undivided roads with 2 or 4 lanes, right? Meaning there is no center left turn. And why is that? Well, here's an example. The picture on the left is an aerial. This is US 31 in the Traverse City area, so in northern Michigan. And you can see on the left, it's a 4-lane roadway. This is a speed limit of 55 miles per hour. It kind of connects a couple urban areas, so the speeds are higher. You can see that you're on Grand Traverse Bay of Lake Michigan. So lots of views, things to be distracted by for drivers. And you can see a full paved shoulders, 12-foot wide lanes. It seems like a safe, quote unquote, safe road, right? But in the past, this stretch of road averaged 2 to 3 fatalities or serious injuries a year, primarily due to head-on crashes and sideswipe opposite crashes. So what was the solution, right? We implemented this. It's the same roadway, right? Except there's a couple new elements. There's a centerline buffer area that did not exist before, and the roadway was not widened to achieve this. The shoulder was narrowed, and the lanes were narrowed a bit to achieve this. So what happened? Speeds were slowed, not below the speed limit, right? But slowed from what they were previously. You can see that there are rumble strips on the edge lines and on the center lines, both center lines. And you can see it's just it feels a little bit narrower. And now there is actually room for error. So if someone does cross their center line, it doesn't mean they're hitting a vehicle. It means there's room to recover, right? So since implementation 2 years ago, 0 fatalities and 0 serious injuries on this roadway. So I think this is a really good example of providing room for error without making drivers overly comfortable. Intersections. Very similarly, and this is very high level stuff that we need to get further into, but for fatalities and serious injuries at intersections, specifically angle crashes, we see a few things. We see that two-way stop conditions are an issue. We see that at those two-way stop conditions, stop and proceed crashes are more prevalent than just simply running a stop sign. And then we also see that right turn lanes on the main line, multiple approach lanes on the stop controlled approach seem to be prevalent in the locations that see these types of crashes. And again, if you ask why, you start to figure it out, right? So if you say a vehicle is sitting here on a 2-lane approach that is stop controlled, the north-south movement or the up and down is a free flow, right? If a vehicle is sitting here, they can easily judge this direction, right? They have full sight to that vehicle to judge their gap. In this direction, they do as well, unless a vehicle pulls up to them and wants to turn left, right? So this is potentially the issue with multiple lane approaches, is that vehicles are simply blocking each other's sight. And then if you think of a vehicle wanting to turn right off of the main line, is now blocking further that sight vision. So simple things like assessing whether or not we need all these approach lanes on these stop controlled intersections, whether or not we need right turn lanes on the main line, and whether or not stop control is the appropriate method to control traffic at an intersection like this. If all these lanes are needed, is stop control the correct method? So simply asking questions, asking why questions can get you towards more systemic type solutions and hopefully get you towards zero deaths. So in summary, this is the safe system approach. Wheel is on the right that we've all seen. Some enhancements to it in Michigan on the left to further that theme, to help set our direction, with the goal of, without getting too crazy with it, making drivers a bit more uncomfortable and getting ourselves more comfortable with that theme. So I thank you for your time today, and please be safe.